the pictures that we have of him are fundamentally lies. They're constructions that are created by institutional powers to have a vested interest in you seeing God a certain way, so that they can monetize your guilt and so that they can monetize your shame, right?
Yeah.
And this is something that when we begin to process and heal from this stuff, we find an ally in the very person we thought was our enemy. And man, the healing that you encounter when you reach that place is incredible. Yeah.
My friends, welcome to the Thoughts on Purpose podcast. I am very, very grateful and honored to be introducing our amazing guest for today, Pastor Marcos Torres. That's as extravagant as I'm going to get with your name, brother. Very grateful to have you here, legend. I've seen your work, listened to your work before a lot, and have been very moved by some of the conversations you have and what you're putting out in the world. So thank you for being here today.
Dude, the pleasure's all mine. I'm super stoked to be here. Thank you for just allowing me to be on your space and share with you and your audience. It's an honor for sure.
Thank you, mate. Thank you so much. So I'm excited for where this conversation is going to go because it's interesting. You're actually the third pastor I've had on my podcast, and I've not had that many guests. I've had a real connection with people who are talking about the deeper things, if you want.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
The things that get overlooked a lot, especially in the business world and in the mindset world. And really, it's the stuff that counts so much. And so I'm excited, especially given what we're navigating through in the world right now. I'm excited to bring this conversation to people, and particularly what the way you talk about healing, the way you talk about connecting to something deeper. I know people are going to get so much value from this. So to begin, Marcos, I'd just love to hear a bit about your journey to becoming a pastor. Like, when did you know this was your calling? When did you know this was your purpose?
Great question, man. I'll give you the short version.
Sure.
I was, it's been a bit of a journey of an up and down and sort of spiral that's gone in a few different directions, but there's been a constant in it. And that constant has been the desire to journey with and support people in their spiritual journeys, their spiritual adventures. And that goes back to when I was about 17 years old, when I had a God encounter of my own. And that encounter just put this fire in my bones. And it's one of those things that you just, you know this as a coach, when you've got a fire in your bones, when you have a purpose and an assignment in this world, you can't contain that thing. It's just coming out of you,
So true.
So I had this experience at around 17 years old, but I didn't go straight into being a pastor at that point. I actually joined the Army, and I was in the Army for 4.5 years. Until about 2009, did a tour in Iraq, and then kind of got back and decided, I think I'm done with the Army. I think it's time to pursue my assignment. This isn't it. I enjoyed my time that I was there. I enjoyed being a sergeant and leading soldiers, but it wasn't my assignment. I knew that I had to step into where I was meant to be. So yeah, this is the long story short, decided as soon as I got back from Iraq, I decided, look, let's close this chapter and jump into the next one. So went to university and then moved out to Australia without a job at all. I was a personal trainer at the time. So I just decided, hey, I'm just going to go there and work as a personal trainer and see if pastoring opens up, because I had done both in university. So the personal trainer thing didn't work out for reasons that are extremely logistical and annoying that I'll save for a separate conversation. But it didn't take long before I was actually able to start pastoring. And I've been doing it now for 7 years, journeying with people. That's my favorite thing about this particular role, is the opportunity to journey with people, listen to people's stories, and just go on these adventures with them. And what I have found throughout all of the years that I've been doing this is there's an assumption when it comes to the world of the pastor, that the pastor is he's the guru, right? He's the guy with all the answers, and you're coming to him to resolve all. and I've actually found that I've actually found it to be kind of the opposite. It's not I don't really see myself as a guru, but rather as I'm journeying with people, there's so much I'm learning. There's this mutual sort of adventuring or traveling that we do together. And I often refer to all the people that I have journeyed with in the last 7 years as a pastor. I refer to them as my rabbis. You know, they have taught me, they have empowered me, and I've learned so much along the way. So yeah, that's a little bit in a nutshell. I love my journey.
I love it, brother. Thank you for sharing that. I wasn't actually aware that you were in the military. That's incredible.
Yeah.
And what an amazing experience. What an amazing experience. And I loved how you just trusted when you came over to Australia. Like it was either going to work out with personal training or the pastor work, and you were safe. So yeah, I love that. I respect that a lot. And also for everyone listening, you know, I know you from the work I've observed you do online as, you know, a spiritual guide, a spiritual coach, a spiritual mentor, whichever way you want to talk about it. Like that's how I see you whenever I listen to your work. Like that's someone, and I love the way you approach this topic, or the whole world of spirituality. You bring a lightness to it, which when I came across your work was something that really drew me to you. I've been caught and been a part of certain conversations in my life. I was brought up in a very strict Catholic family dynamic, and I'm very grateful for the way that was. However, I didn't resonate with it. It was something that I was told I was, and I never got a say in that. And I'm very grateful for the way that was because it served me. However, there were some parts of it that didn't feel true to me. And I think you've spoken about like church hurt and these other things I've heard you talk about before, where I was really mad at religion I grew up in at points in my life, and I actually started despising it, and it really tainted spirituality for me.
Yeah,
and this is why, you know, when I find incredible pastors or people doing spiritual work such as yourself, I'm fascinated to talk to them. Like I'm genuinely curious because I know the power of the spirituality and the importance of it. And I know I'm not the only one who's had experiences where it's been heavy, it's been tainted tainted in the wrong light. So for anyone who's had, and we're going to kind of dive straight into the conversation right now. For anyone who's had past, I think you call it church hurt. Is that what the term is?
That's one of the terms that I use is church hurt. Yeah.
Yeah. If someone's got that, how do they start healing from that?
Yeah, that's a really good question, man. And look, I'd begin by saying that I think the reason why I'm so passionate about this particular conversation is because of the deep spiritual wounds that I've carried in my own experience and in my own life. What I didn't say in my quick summary of what led me to be a pastor is that there was a dark side to it. And there was a lot of wounds and a lot of spiritual and religious trauma that I was carrying with me, to the point where I actually entered a state of passive suicidal ideation. And depression was extremely bad. Anxiety was extremely bad. And it got to the point where I actually had to go see a therapist, go on meds for a little while, you know, and I like to put that out there because I want to normalize that. You know, I think there's a culture of sort of shame that still surrounds the idea of, you know, medication or therapy. But yeah, look, I want to normalize it. You know, here I am. Well, retired wouldn't necessarily be the right word because I didn't make a career out of it, but a former Army sergeant, served a tour in Iraq. I wouldn't necessarily consider myself a tough guy, but most people would classify that somewhere in the realm of tough.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I want to normalize this and say, look, if you need help, if you need therapy, if you need medication, go for it, man. Like, don't let anyone tell you that that's for weak people, because it's not the case. So yeah, I had to go through that journey, and those wounds and you know, healing and the whole process of that has been incredible in my life. And those wounds, I think, are what I have decided to lean on to make a difference in the world. And this is a challenge that I give to people, and especially in the mindset space, because when it comes to coaching and mindset, we tend to think of like, what are the strengths that you can use to make a difference in the world? And in my own journey, what I have learned is that that's good. It's good to lean on our strengths and make a difference in the world. But I found sometimes people sit back and they're like, oh, I don't know what my strengths are. And you kind of have to go through this giant spiel to try and figure it out. One of the things I've learned is rather than thinking only exclusively in terms of what strengths can I use to change the world, also sit back and think, what scars do I have? And what wounds can I use to change the world? Because while most of us might be able to struggle to identify our particular giftings or strengths, it should be a lot easier to identify your wounds. And if you can lean on your wounds and find a place of healing in that, and then amplify that to the world, let that be your story, right? Your pain story. There's an incredible amount of work to do there, right? The world doesn't need more heroes and more know-it-alls. It needs more real people who have experienced real pain in life, who have something to say about it. So anyways, that's a side issue. I just thought I'd throw that in there just because it came up.
That's very good. I like that. I learned a lot from that. That's good.
So, look, spiritual healing, it's a big conversation. Let me know how far you want to go into it. But what I have discovered is that, at least in terms of spiritual healing, it really depends on the individual. When I'm going through a process of spiritual healing with people, the very first thing I do is I just sit down and listen and listen and listen, because it really depends on the individual, what they have experienced, what they need to process. And then, of course, you have to sort of customize an approach toward healing and answering specific questions. Sometimes there's specific thorns that are in a person's spirit that need to be pulled out, and they're not always the same. But if I could give a general synopsis, there's a system that I use called perceptional realignment. And the whole basic idea behind that system is, I want you to imagine someone, and you could probably imagine this easily, having church hurt yourself. You grow up in church and or in some sort of religious community, and there's religious trauma or religious abuse that you've experienced in that impacts your life, and so you decide, this is too negative, I don't align with this, I'm going to throw all my beliefs away, I'm going to go become an atheist, or I'm going to go become an agnostic, right? What I have found most of the time, and this is probably not true all of the time, but at least most of the time, what I found is abandoning belief might help in preventing further damage, but it doesn't really undo the damage already done. And the reason why is because there's a distinction between our perceptions and our beliefs. Our perceptions are a lot harder to define. Beliefs are, you can kind of dissect them logically, and you can peel them back, and you can weigh them up against evidence. Perceptions are a little bit harder because you don't really learn perceptions academically, you catch them. And I'm struggling even to explain it, right? It's something that is caught, it's not really taught. And so, but what I mean by perception is how you see yourself, how you see the world, how you see the cosmos. The interpretive lens through which you interact with the world around you. And the only way, like when it comes to spiritual abuse or religious trauma or church hurt, it's usually the perceptions that are damaged. And so when you say, hey, I'm sick of this, I'm leaving, I don't believe in God anymore. And that's fine. Like, I hope nobody thinks I'm knocking that. Like, that's your journey. Like, I support you. But what tends to happen is that only addresses the belief section, which are thoughts, right? Like tangible thoughts. It doesn't really get to the perceptions. The perceptions are still there. You still see yourself, and you still see the world around you and the color of the universe by those damaged perceptions. And so the only way to really contend with that and heal from it is you gotta face it. You gotta call the demon by its name. You gotta go toe to toe with God, essentially. Even if you don't believe in him anymore, you still gotta go toe to toe with him, and root the real fundamental interpretive lenses that are at play underneath the surface. And once you do that work, then everything else begins to shape and mold in a healthier way. So that's sort of like, in a nutshell, how I approach the issue of spiritual healing. And look, I'm not a therapist, I'm a pastor. So I am careful in how I do this and make sure that I'm not like going beyond the scope of my expertise. But I have found incredible healing, not only in my own life through this process, but leading others through it as well for the last 7 years. It's been awesome.
Amazing. Incredible. I love that. I love that breakdown. And I'm fascinated when you said go toe to toe with God. Go toe to toe with God. Like, I think I know what you mean, but like I'm just picturing some Rocky Balboa going on here.
Yeah.
Like, what does that actually mean? Like, can you give me an example of what that looks like in say a practice each day?
Yeah, absolutely. So the whole idea, and let me try and do this simply and not get too complicated. Because a lot of this, again, even the toe-to-toe with God is individualized, right? So what it looks like for you is going to be different to what it looks like for me.
Yeah.
But the basic idea is what you're trying to do in perceptual realignment is you're trying to identify the perceptions through which you interpret yourself and the world around you. So if you were raised, for example, with an image or a picture or a panorama of God, and I'm using this as a very basic example, right, of God, and that the posture for which that God takes in the universe is that he relates to you first and foremost by communicating to you how abhorrent you are to him. And this happens, right? There's people who have literally, that's their God story. So God, then being sort of like the primal lens of the universe, sees you as abhorrent. And your religious community reinforces this, and your parents reinforce this, and your the sermons that you hear and the Bible studies, it all reinforces this idea, right? Like God sees you as abhorrent. This tends to be a lot worse, for example, for LGBTQ people, right? Like they tend to experience this at a higher degree than most other people. But if you are in a spiritually abusive environment, you're going to experience that to one degree or another. And so the thing is that becomes a lens through which you see yourself, and it becomes a lens through which you see the world around you. And merely saying, I don't believe in God anymore, what that will do is you might change, again, as I mentioned earlier, you might change the belief. Oh, I don't believe in the God who sees me this way anymore. But those perceptions are still at play underneath you. And so how do you heal those perceptions? Well, you have to go back to the actual God who framed your reality this way. And you have to fight with him, and you have to get angry with him, right? And this is one of the things I lead people through is like, actually allowing yourself to feel the rage against God. Because when you're in one of the symptoms of spiritual abuse or spiritually abusive environments is that there's certain emotions that are not permitted, right? And there's certain questions that are not permitted. You cannot ask certain questions without being seen as a troublemaker. And you cannot experience or feel certain emotions without being, what's the word I'm looking for? Ridiculed or hammered down with platitudes. And so what you have is people who have gone their whole lives in these environments who've never really been allowed to feel the anger, and who've never really been allowed to go toe to toe with God, to get angry at him, to pray angry prayers, right? To just unleash it. And it's really interesting because it's not all that different when we're dealing with human trauma, right? Where there's a point where you have to contend with that thing. This is one of the experiences that I had when I was going through my healing journey. I had one of my therapists say to me, some demons can only be overcome if you call them by name. Right? Yeah. So I had to actually name this thing verbally out loud and just like put it out there and then wrestle with it. And what's amazing is that this idea that I'm expressing, this idea of fighting with God, of being angry with God, of contending with him, is actually deeply rooted in ancient Hebraic thought. Right? Like the very Bible itself is built on the notion of fighting with God, to the point that there's a very famous story in the Old Testament for those who read the Bible, where there's a man named Jacob who fights with God and wins. Right? They wrestle all night long and fights with God. And, you know, the sun is rising and God says, you need to let me go because the sun is rising. And Jacob says, I'm not going to let you go till you bless me. Like, he refuses to let go. And so God blesses him and says, I'm going to change your name to Israel because you fought with God and you won. Well, Israel is like the primal character in the Old Testament, right? And even in the New Testament.
Yeah.
And the very word Israel means you fought with God and won. That's what the word means. You know, so this idea of fighting with him, of contending with him, of seeing him act in certain ways that you're like, I'm not digging that, I'm not feeling that. Like, that's actually a very faithful way of relating to him, as opposed to, oh no, man, he's sovereign. Don't say anything. You know, repress and repress and repress, and that just causes more damage. So, look, there's a lot more I could say there, but I'm just trying to keep it, you know, sort of basic.
Yeah. I love this. I've never heard this concept, and I see what you mean now by going toe to toe with God. Like, this makes a lot of sense, and I love everything you're saying, because 1,000%, if you don't face off with the demons inside, then really you become a plaything of those things. You know, right. You're at the mercy of them. That's so right. I love what you're saying, and I've heard that story of Israel, like. Yeah. Incredible. And I've never just made that link, because exactly what you were saying, growing up, I was told, you've got to be respectful, you've got to fear God. And it's like, oh, God, bow down before God. But then we humans, God's given us these emotions, God's given us this range, this emotional range to play within. And so, and I love the wording as well. So what you were saying is angry with God, not angry at God, which is, I think that was deliberate wording.
Very deliberate. Yeah, that's a really good way of picking that up. Good. Well done there. Yeah. There's a sense in which the experience of the experience. I like to explain it this way. Let me explain it this way. You correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm sure I saw somewhere at some point that you have military experience as well. Am I completely false there?
No, you're correct.
I did. Okay, right. Okay. Tell me a little bit about that. Army, Air Force?
Army. At 17 years old, I trained as a combat medic in the Army Reserves, and that led me to working in hospitals and emergency departments and all that stuff to get my training as a combat medic. Never got deployed or anything, but did the training.
Yeah. Fantastic. Okay, so you'd be familiar then with zeroing your rifles and training, training to actually, shoot your rifles and stuff.
Yes.
This is something really interesting I learned when I was in basic training. And that was the very first day we went to a range. Mm-hmm. And they gave us our M16s, and the drill instructors tell us, how to shoot the gun, and, you practice with blanks and stuff and all these things. But then you finally go to the range and you finally have to actually hit a target.
Yeah.
300 meters, 500 meters, 800 meters. And one of the things I learned on that very first day at the range is that when you pull that trigger, you're looking at your target through a scope, right? And if you don't have an actual zoom scope, you'd be looking at them through the sights, right?
Yes.
And what I was doing is I was aiming at my target through the sights, and I'm pulling the trigger, and I'm watching my breath and doing it, very centered. And I'm thinking I'm doing good. But my bullets keep landing, pretty far from the target. And we'd already zeroed our rifles at that point. So I knew it wasn't like my eye to sight ratio that was off, like something else was off.
Yeah.
And I couldn't figure out what it was until the drill sergeant actually explained it to me. He said, look, when you're off on your target, on your sight's right in front of you, right? It's right there, right in front of your eye. I mean, just like inches away. And when you're looking at your target through your sights, if you're off on your sight just by a centimeter, I mean, that's even too big. It would be even smaller than that, like a nanometer. I don't know. If you're off by just a little bit, it doesn't look like a big deal, because you can still see your target and it looks like it's right in your sights and everything. It doesn't look like a big deal. But if you're off by just a little bit on your sights, by the time the bullet travels 800 meters and gets downrange, it's missing by a foot or two.
True. Yep.
So what doesn't look like a big deal right there in front of you, by the time it actually reaches where it matters, it could be the difference between life and death.
Yeah.
And the reason why I bring that up is because this is what our perception of God is like. If our perception of God at the very primordial level, at the very basic level, at the earliest, most ontological level is off, by the time that perception reaches where it matters, which is your everyday life, it can be the difference between a life of enthusiasm and a life of cynicism, between a life that multiplies beauty on the earth and a life that perpetuates trauma on the earth, right? Ooh, sometimes people will look at the Crusades and they'll say, you know, why were those people so cruel? The Crusades were absolutely horrendous. And I remember thinking about that, you know, some years ago and realizing like, you know, an entire, you know, like one or two sociopaths and psychopaths running around is a pretty good, you know, explanation. But when you have an entire civilization, you know, like you can't get away with, they were all psychopaths, you know, like every single one of them, you know, they were just psychotic rapists and pillagers, right? Like, no, they were normal people. But in that time, they had a perception of God that justified the mistreatment of the other.
Yeah.
And at that early perception of God, right, that primordial perception, by the time it reached where it mattered, which is how you treat others, it was way off from where God actually wanted it to be. And this is like this in our lives as well, right? Like if our perception of him is way off at the very earliest foundational level, by the time it reaches how you relate to others, how you do dating, how you do marriage, how you do social interactions, how you do business, you know, all of these things are impacted by that picture that's skewed. And so part of healing that is you have to go back to this idea, to this picture that you have, to this framework that you've operated all your life with, and you have to express your anger and your frustration. You have to let the emotion out. And what you discover as you go through that journey, and this is something that I usually reserve until later on as I'm journeying with people. It's not something I say off the bat, but what you discover as you go through that journey is that you're not the only one who's angry. God's angry as well, but he's not angry at you. He's angry with you. Right? Because the pictures that we have of him are fundamentally lies. They're constructions that are created by institutional powers to have a vested interest in you seeing God a certain way so that they can monetize your guilt and so that they can monetize your shame, right?
Yeah.
And this is something that when we begin to process and heal from this stuff, we find an ally in the very person we thought was our enemy. And man, the healing that you encounter when you reach that place is incredible. Yeah.
Awesome. I love that. That's very, very powerful indeed. And one thing that my own experience was that I've always had an amazing relationship with God. However, I detached from that at points in my life because I felt like I wasn't living up to the expectation my religion had on me. And so I felt guilty. And I thought I was doing my relationship with God wrong. And I thought, this isn't right. And I was judging myself, which was projecting other people's judgments onto myself. And it was a really kind of messed up space to live in because I knew I had an incredible connection with God. Even as a kid, I used to go to church and I'd sit outside the church and I'd feel more connected to God outside the church, just hanging out in the church, chilling out on my bike, around the church on my bike when the service was going on. And I felt so like connected to God then, but we were told, sit in the church, say your prayers, sit in a confessional, go to confessional.
Yeah.
And I was like, this isn't true. And I remember once hearing one of my uncles apparently told another family member of mine, he said, if you go to church and it doesn't feel right in your heart, if it feels like a lie and you're forcing yourself, he said, get out of there. He said, because you're actually, you're doing yourself a disservice. You're living a lie.
Yeah.
But I was brought up in this very strict Catholic upbringing, and God, you know, I respect my parents. They did a phenomenal job. It was just my experience.
Yeah.
So I love hearing what you're saying, but can you just talk to that a little bit about if someone's got a unique relationship with God, and how important is it to just cultivate a relationship that feels true to you versus a relationship that other people say you should have?
Yeah, absolutely, man. Oh, dude, there's so many things I could say about this.
Yeah. We can talk for hours about this.
So many things I could say about this single point right here. Let me find the starting place and then dive in.
It'll be the perfect one, whatever you come up with.
This is good. These are great questions. Here's the thing. A part of, and it seems to me, I can almost sense through Zoom, just by the energy that you portray, that you've done some healing work in this space.
Yeah.
And so well done. I'm proud of you for that.
Thank you.
Part of the healing journey is coming to terms with, Dietrich Bonhoeffer once said, we should understand people less by what they do and more by what they've suffered. And I was also raised in an extremely strict, fundamentalist religious home, which is where a lot of my religious wounds came from.
Got it.
And part of my healing journey, I had to get to the place where I was able to look at the people who raised me within that environment and within that sort of structure. And I was able to see that structure isn't for me, but I can see why it was so meaningful for them. I can see how it gave meaning and shape to the chaos of their life, and how, to a certain degree, they wanted that for me, which is why they pushed it so hard. And so I can cradle that and say, I'm not mad at them anymore. You know, it's a little different when someone has been in a religious abusive environment that, we're talking here is, you know, people who are just like trying to make sense of life, and they get themselves into these really straitjacket type systems and they pass it on to their kids. It's a little bit different when you've got people who actually are like bona fide abusive, like actively, right? There's different dynamics at play there. So, but at least in the dynamic that I've experienced, and it seems similar with yours, you can cradle that and say like, hey, I can see why this was so meaningful for you, and I can appreciate what you were trying to do. You know, I can see you through that lens, you know.
Good.
But ultimately, fundamentally, the way I understand it is that most of the religious systems that have developed throughout history, including Christianity, are artificial systems. And that's not a moral statement. The artificial system doesn't make it necessarily good or necessarily bad. Some people find meaning in it. Where it becomes necessarily good or necessarily bad is where the artificial system that provides meaning for one person is forcefully applied to another. Where you say, here's the formula, here's the system, here's the straitjacket that you have to wear in order to experience God. And that's fundamentally what religion is, right? Like, spirituality is like this free experience of being one with the earth and the cosmos and God, and religion sort of gives shape to that. And there's nothing wrong with giving it shape, but it can go overboard. I explained this to Joel Brown in one of the interviews that we had like this, that you can kind of think of it as, you know, when you're single, you're in the market, so to speak, you know, for dating.
Yep.
You have relational passion that's not directed anywhere, right? Yep. It's kind of like, you know, I'm in the market. I can find anyone I'm compatible with, and direct my relational passion in that direction. But at the moment, I haven't found that person, so the relational passion doesn't have a shape to it. It's just kind of out there, right?
Yeah, true.
And then you can find someone that you're really compatible with, someone who really, you complement their life and they complement yours, and you decide, hey, I'm going to invest my relational passion by committing to this person, to our relationship, and that takes on a shape, right? That's a relationship. Now you can also think of it going overboard, where you have a codependent or a controlling relationship where one person says to the other, you know, you can only go where I say you can go, and you can only talk to whoever I say, you know, abusive relationship, right?
Yeah.
The way I've generally understood it is that spirituality is kind of like that single state where you're in the market, you know, and you've got all this relational or spiritual passion that doesn't really have a shape to it. And that has a beauty of its own, right?
Yeah.
Religion can kind of be like the opposite, Religion can be like that controlling spouse or that controlling boyfriend or girlfriend that robs you of your autonomy and your individuality and your agency.
Yeah.
And what I've understood through the years of studying Jesus and studying faith and journeying with people is that what God is fundamentally calling us to is not that sort of straitjacket. He's not calling us to that deletion of the self as we subsume ourselves within some really rigid system. What he's calling us to is a relationship where all my spiritual passion can be shaped and co-authored with him. And it's going to look different for me than it looks for you. But if I'm in this relationship with him and I'm co-authoring with him, like I do with any other relationship, we, in my own dancing with him, that relationship takes on a beautiful shape. Yeah. And the purpose of that shape is to multiply beauty on the earth, and then you're doing the same in your own relationship with him. It's taking on a shape of its own. And then we can actually like link together in the old school phrase would be the phrase fellowship, right? Like we can actually come together in fellowship with that mutual dance that we're having with God and look at ways that we can cooperate to amplify that beauty that we're trying to bring on the earth, Yeah. And so I would really encourage people, man, if you find yourself within a straitjacket system and you feel repressed and you feel like your agency, your autonomy is being robbed, that's not what God is about. That's not what he's interested in. He's not looking to delete your sense of self or subsume it, submit it to his sort of controlling, coercive will. Yeah. What he's looking for is an authentic relationship where the two of you can co-author and co-create beauty on the earth and dance together, right? Yeah. And so again, another one of those questions where depending on the person's specific context, we would talk through it and find like a very customized approach on how to deal with it. Because one of the things you have to consider is it's very easy in our sort of Western context, our highly privatized and individualistic culture, to say to someone, hey, if you're in that sort of thing, detach yourself. But that's like a Western privilege. True. Depending on what cultural background you come from, that might not be an option. So then how do you navigate that without losing yourself and continuing to, like be hurt by these systems? And that's a separate conversation that I would have with someone on their individual level. But hopefully that helps a bit. Yeah. Answering that question. Yeah.
That's incredible, brother. I love this conversation, and I'm even from what you've said so far, I feel a greater excitement to cultivate my relationship with God and around that human experience of if I have anger, it's anger with God. Like it's okay to do. Like you've kind of given me permission in this conversation. I'm going to go get in the ring tonight. This is good.
Yeah, absolutely, man.
So I can even just sense the healing that would come from that. Because when I think about the relationship I have with God, just to be very open, it's more of like it's a very peaceful thing, which is incredible and great. However, it kind of lacks the human experience at times, where it's like I would almost avoid being in prayer if I don't feel peaceful.
Yeah.
As opposed to, being in the mess and still being in prayer.
Yeah.
So that's what I've taken away from this so far. So I'm just curious, like to add to this, why is it like someone's out there right now, they're going through their life, maybe they've got an element of a level of success, they're doing okay. They're doing life. They don't really have a relationship with God at all. And it's just like, whatever. Why should they bother? Like, why should they go and take the time to cultivate this relationship? Like, what's the point? Like, if they're doing okay, what's the point?
Absolutely. Really, really good question. The way that I interact with this question is by first deconstructing the way Christians often approach it. Christianity historically approaches this question with a framework termed God as necessity, right? Where I'll say to you, I know life's going great, but you need God for
1,000%.
Right. And it, Hey, look, I'm a weird pastor. I say things that get me in trouble all the time. A lot of times what happens is that the need is really more of a threat. You need God in your life or else you're going to burn in hell, right? Or you need God in your life or else everything's going to fall apart. Or you need God in your life or you can't succeed or you can't have meaning. I don't buy any of those. I know plenty of people who are atheists, and I've read plenty of existential philosophers. Existentialism is my favorite philosophical school of thought, who have some pretty remarkable ways of shaping meaning in life without belief in God. And I know plenty of people who are doing remarkably well without belief in God as well. You know, they're succeeded, and you know and I'm not talking about like, oh, they've got money and they're out there being hedonists. No, very centered, you know, kind people. Their life is marked by equilibrium and balance. The kind of people that make you proud to be human. You know, I know plenty of people like that who aren't necessarily believers in God or believers in Jesus like I am.
Yeah.
So the way I interact with this question, and look, this may not work for everyone. You know, maybe someone will hear this and say, "Oh, that doesn't work for me." That's okay. It's what works for me, and it's what has enabled a lot of the people I've journeyed with throughout life to actually wrestle with this question and find themselves growing closer to God as a result.
Yes.
And the way I would frame the question is this. Imagine that you had an opportunity to meet someone who was responsible for something that you really loved. So for example, and pardon me, because like I've read a lot of philosophers over the years, so sometimes I say things more complicated than I should. So let me try and trim that down.
You're doing great.
One of the things I love, one of the most beautiful creations that I can imagine in this world is Tony Bennett's music. I love Tony Bennett, man.
That's so good. I love
Bennett. So good. And to have the chance to go see Tony Bennett live would have been a dream. I'm never going to get that chance now. He's retired. He's got Alzheimer's, last I heard. Mm-hmm. To have the chance to see him live would be remarkable. To have the chance to meet him and talk to him would have been even more remarkable, right? Mm-hmm. Or I can think of John Mayer. Who's another one of my favorite musicians. You know, one guy, seriously, every year that the anniversary passes, I get emotional. It's like the one day that I'm like fighting back the tears. I would have loved to have met Avicii, the DJ. Love the guy's music, you know, and just every year that passes and they do, you know, like this sort of the tribute concerts, I'm always watching them. What I would give to sit down and have lunch with that guy. That would have been incredible, you know? Now, here's the thing. Why do I want to meet these guys? I want to meet them because they are creators of beautiful art. They are creators of things that I have enjoyed in my life, things that have brought a lot of meaning and value to my experience as a human being. And so if I had a chance to meet them, why wouldn't I, right? It would be awesome. And do I need to? Probably not. But would I jump at the chance to get to know them? You betcha, you know? And I think in some ways, this is what knowing God should be about. It's like, okay, your life's doing great. You've got lots of things going well for you. List to me all the things in life that you love. Write a list for me. What are the things in life that you absolutely love? I love family. I love music. I love good food. You know, I love this world that I can travel and the diversity of culture, like, you know, whatever, you know, list all the things that you absolutely love in this world. And my challenge as a pastor would be, would you like to get to know the guy who engineered all that? Would you like to get to know the mind, the mastermind behind everything that you absolutely love? Because you can get to know him. You can get to know the designer behind everything you absolutely adore. And if someone says to me, yeah, no, I'm not interested in getting to know the designer behind everything I absolutely adore, then my next question would be, why? What's the blockage? And it's usually there that you start to find the religious trauma, right? The lies about God, the things that forcefully separate us from him. But if you can remove that religious trauma, right? If you can get rid of those false pictures of God that have caused damage to you, and you can just think of him as this incredible creative mastermind who is the source of everything you absolutely adore. And you have a chance to just meet him and have a conversation with him and get to know the guy who designed everything you love. Why not? You know? So I don't approach this in the sense of, God has necessity. Like, you need God because without him, you can't have X, Y, Z. For me, that's a transactional model of relating to God. How would you like it if the people in your life who love you are only with you because they get X, Y, Z? You know? Yeah. So many people go to church because they don't want to go to hell. Like, God's fire insurance, right? Like, as William Lane Craig once said, you know, he's not fire insurance. He's worth getting to know because he's good in and of himself. You know? And everything that you absolutely adore in life finds its origin in his heart. So wouldn't that just be the most incredible thing to poke at and dissect and get to know, you know?
Brother.
That would be my answer to that question.
Yeah. Solid answer. Wow. You absolutely nailed that. That is very, very, I connected with that on a deep level. Thank you for that. And I guess people could say, well, beyond that, why would I bother? Like, I'm thinking of some of the clients I've worked with, very hardcore business people, high-level entrepreneurs. They might say, well, why bother? And then you mentioned the word insurance. It's not necessarily an insurance. However, it is a foundation, isn't it? It's like, how deep do you want to have your foundation for your true success in life? And so cultivating a relationship with something beyond the physical realms and in the spiritual realms is just establishing a foundation for all the aspects of your life to just be as strong as they possibly can. That in my mind is why you want to do this. And absolutely. Like, and you know, our little one, many people who've listened to my podcast know that our youngest daughter, we've got 3 little ones. Our youngest daughter was born with 4 holes in her heart. And we had to navigate her going through that journey, and the uncertainty and the confusion that came with that was massive. However, it was having a spiritual connection to the perfection of life and the belief that everything is happening for us. Everything is on the way, not in the way. And my wife and I held on to that, and we trusted that. And I cannot tell you, Marcos, like, looking back, that is all I see. Like, that journey with Valeska, our youngest baby girl, like, it was 1,000% necessary. There was just so much perfection to it. I can't even articulate it. It is just beyond words. And I can see that because all the time we had that belief, we're running, like, this is serving us. I was building my coaching business. It was, we had no money. It was the worst possible time. However, it was perfect timing at the same time. Yeah. And it's just that belief that, you know, it's happening for your greater good. It's exactly what you need. And you're not forgotten. You're not condemned. It's actually a gift. It's all a gift. That is insurance. That is, that's foundation, man, you know? Yeah. So I love the work you're doing, brother. I absolutely love it. And I can't express how much I've enjoyed this conversation as well. Like, it's been phenomenal.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you for all the really good questions. You've kept me on my toes.
Oh, no, of course, brother. Of course. I've got a couple more. Are you okay if I drop a couple?
Sure. Yeah. No, go for it. Yeah.
Yep. My first one would be, why in this time? Like, why right now, with everything, all the transition happening in the world and whatever you believe? I respect that. However, I think everyone would agree this is a massively transitional time. What do you believe right now is it's a great thing, or it would be really beneficial to people to work on their relationship with God, particularly now?
Yeah. Really good question. Let me think about this for a moment. There's a lot of different ways I can go in this.
Yeah.
I would premise it by saying that I have an assumption that I bring to the God conversation. The assumption that I bring to the God conversation is that there's actually nothing I can really say to convince someone to engage God in a relationship. That's an assumption that I bring to the conversation. There's literally no logic or reason or argument that I could bring to the table that would convince someone, hey, I should give God a go. If anything I say convinces you to give God a go, it's because to one degree or another, you've already been opening yourself up to what he's doing in your life. So what I believe is that he's active, right? He's historical. He's immersed in the human story. And as a historical being immersed in the human story, he is constantly reaching out and touching lives and calling people to know him. We may not know his name. We may have no religious background whatsoever, but there's this force, there's this thing in the cosmos beckoning us to know it and to go deeper with it. And what I have found is that that power is incredible. And when we respond to that power, when we respond to that invitation, we can go on this incredible journey of knowing God. But when we resist that invitation, right? When we resist that invitation, there's literally nothing I could ever say. And the reason why is because if you can resist the invitation of the most powerful being in the universe, there's no way my limited knowledge and insight is it. I'm not that good a salesman, right? Like actually, I don't have any sales skills whatsoever. So I would say, look, if you find yourself listening to this and you're like, yeah, I really want to pour into my relationship with God, it probably has a lot or very little to do with anything I've said. I'm sure that there was already a trajectory, an opening of the inner self to him already in motion. Maybe you didn't realize it, but it's already in motion, right? That's evidence that the presence of God is already active in your life and sort of awakening you to this connection with him. The second thing I would say to that question is, I like to look at this existentially. We're living in what some have called uncertain times. I don't really agree, because if you really think about it, when has anything ever been certain, right? So uncertainty is the lot of the human experience. It's always uncertain, right? Nothing's ever guaranteed. So when people say we're living in uncertain times, I'm like, how's that any different to? It's always been uncertain. So now here's the thing, though. Even though it's always been uncertain, but what tends to happen is there's different types of uncertainty. There's uncertainty that's catastrophic, that forces us to pay attention. And then there's uncertainty that's a little bit more mild that we can ignore. And what tends to happen is, even though all of life is uncertain, when the uncertainty is a little mild, we can develop modes of navigation to sort of blind ourselves to that. And the modes of navigation that most people use are amusement, duties, or transcendence. And what I mean by that is amusement. I navigate or I medicate the anxieties, the existential anxieties and uncertainties that I face through amusement. This could be either hedonistic amusement or, sort of balanced amusement. You could be out there doing drugs and partying and, or you could just, be watching too much Netflix. There's a spectrum of how we as humans engage with these things, but we amuse ourselves, right? We amuse ourselves to death as the book. I forget when that book was published, Amusing Ourselves to Death. Good book if you can read it. Okay. So we amuse ourselves, and this is sort of a mode of navigation. We navigate the uncertainty of being by constantly having noise that distracts us from it. That's sort of like the first tier level. The second tier level is when you immerse yourself in your duties and your responsibilities as a human being. And this tends to be sort of like, the mindset world, like embracing our responsibilities and embracing our duties and constructing and crafting a better life and getting disciplined and all these things. And we immerse ourselves in that. And what a lot of people don't realize is that even though that is all positive and good stuff, it can be a pill. It can be a medication, right? True. It can be a numbing agent so that we don't have to contend with the uncertainties and anxieties that we haven't wrestled with. Oftentimes people in the duties sort of mode of navigation look down on people in the amusement mode of navigation, like you're wasting your life, like get disciplined. And then generally speaking, what happens, this is sort of an adaptation of Kierkegaard's stages on life's way, right? Soren Kierkegaard, one of the father of existentialism, looked at life as this sort of the stages on life's way. And this final stage, this transcendent stage, is kind of when people start to get into like, religion or festivals or mystical modalities or new age or whatever it might be, right? It looks different. You're going to this festival, you're going over there to try that plant and that drug, or, going over here to try that new preacher, like just getting yourself immersed in sort of transcendent language.
Yes.
Which itself is also good. But can itself be a numbing agent, as Marx said, right? The opiate of the masses, religion, right? And so essentially people will navigate uncertainty through these modes of navigation, until the uncertainty becomes catastrophic and the modes collapse. Right? It's what I call modalic collapse, right? You get to a point where the mode of navigation that you have relied on to help you cruise through being, through the tragedy of being, is no longer reliable, right? The pain's too hard. You lost a loved one. There's no amount of Netflix is going to help with that, right? Like, True. You experienced a catastrophic, injury and or disease, and all the hard work that you did to build your business or whatever, it kind of just goes to staying alive, or maybe you experienced a catastrophic collapse in life that completely rips the rug out from under your faith or your system or your way of seeing the world. Everything just sort of collapses. And we find ourselves kind of like this tiny little rowboat in the middle of the ocean, in the middle of the storm. No anchor, nowhere to go, right? And so the reason I think why it's important to have a connection with God is because most of the ways in which we deal with the world, in which we engage with the world, are transactional, right? We are aiming to get from it. And we treat spirituality the same way, right? Where we say, and I see this a lot in the spiritual coaching space, by the way, and it frustrates me a little bit. And it is slightly a separate conversation. So I'm on a little bit of a tangent here, but we tend to treat spirituality as just another means through which I can achieve whatever temporal aims I have.
Yep.
Right. And so spirituality just becomes another product on the shelf. It becomes another consumer product that, if you can just tap into this, you can make more money and, find the person of your dreams and blah, blah, blah. Right. Whereas I tend to think that if spirituality is to be authentic, it must retain the right to completely destroy everything you think is valid and completely upend everything you've ever thought was meaningful. And that on the other side of that, you find true everlasting significance and virtue, right? But that's a separate conversation. I went on a tangent there. So
that was good. I was enjoying it.
Come back to your initial question. Why is it important to know God during these times of uncertainty? I would say that it's not so much that it's important to know God in times of uncertainty, or what I would phrase as, uncertain catastrophe, because the times of uncertainty are perpetual. They're always. I would say it's important to know God in times of uncertainty where there's a bit of balance and comfort. The times where we can escape reality and immerse ourselves in amusement and immerse ourselves in duties and immerse ourselves in transcendence and kind of use these as medications through which we can avoid contending with the tragedy of being and the responsibility of freedom and all these difficult things, these difficult questions, right? It's in the times where life is relatively balanced and comfortable. That's actually when it's important to get to know him and to build a deep relationship with him. And the reason why I like to use the example of, like, you can imagine sailors on a ship in the middle of the ocean. There's a giant storm, and the sailors come up to the captain and say, "Hey, captain, there's a big storm and we need to drop the anchor. Where are we going to find one?" Of course, that would never happen, right? Like, that would never, ever happen, because before they left the port, they had their anchor.
Yeah, so true.
Right? they made sure it was there and it was solid before they got into the storm.
Yeah.
You know, and so they could have been doing something else. They could have completely ignored it, you know, and then you get in the storm and you got no anchor. What are you going to do now, right? I think it's important to anchor ourselves in meaning, to anchor ourselves in God, and to anchor ourselves in something cosmic and grand, something bigger than what this world has to offer. Because when you get into the storm, if you've got that anchor in the moments of stillness, when you get into the storm, it's already there. You don't have to go manufacture it. You don't have to go search for it, try and engineer it in the middle of all the pandemonium and catastrophe and mayhem, right? It's already there. And one of the things that COVID really taught me is the overwhelming fragility of everything we thought was so secure.
Mm.
I mean, the pandemic hadn't even started yet, and you had billion-dollar corporations already begging for bailouts. You know, I was like, I thought you guys were untouchable. You know, like, you got so much money. How, you know, and just like that, you know, like the things that we thought were so sure and so solid and so immovable, all of a sudden you started to see through that veneer, and you're like, everything around me and everything that I build my life on is super duper fragile. The existential vulnerability that I place myself in when I anchor myself in houses made of glass and products, you know, made of paper is an existential crime in many ways. It's, you know, it's a tragedy. And so if I have the chance in the moments of stillness to say, rather than lose myself in amusement or lose myself in duties or lose myself in religion, I'm going to take this time to center my being on a true anchor that transcends all of the fragility of the cosmos and all of the fragility of this earth. I'm going to take the time to do that in the moments of stillness and quiet, so that when the storm comes, it's the anchor is already there, man. It's already there. So I don't know if that answers your question.
I love that.
It's kind of a personal answer.
That's good. That's phenomenal. And I guess, you know, both having the military experience in the past, the other way to look at it is sending troops into battle without any training. Like,
that's right.
You want to have you want to have done your training and like know your way around your weapon and all your gear before you get into battle, as it were.
That's right. Yeah.
And have your team beside you and have those relationships with the great people beside you. And yeah, who better to have a relationship than with God, like someone who's always going to be by your side. Things will come and go, but that relationship.
That's right. Yeah. So, everything else is transactional, right? Everything else is vapid and temporary. Yeah. But there are things that are eternal. And, you know, my heritage is Taino Arawakan. And, it's interesting when you look back at a lot of the tribal cultures that looked at the world through a non-consumerist lens, right? It's one of the things that tribal cultures have in common, not just the native Indians, native Caribbeans like that, the Tainos, but I'm pretty sure this is endemic as well to indigenous cultures in Australia and New Zealand. We didn't have a concept of possession like Western cultures do, right? There wasn't this concept of this belongs to me, you know, this is mine, right? There wasn't this concept of possession. We didn't see the world transactionally. We saw the world in a sense as, you know, this is passing, you know, it's here. And while I'm here, I want to cultivate its beauty, but I also recognize that it and I are passing. And so the objective then of being isn't to just accumulate, right? This is a very Western way of thinking. In many ways, to wrestle with these ideas, we have to deconstruct a lot of the ways we as Europeans have been taught to think and see the world. We have to decolonize to a large degree and begin to see the cosmos in a completely different light and realize, like, actually, my existence isn't about the accumulation of more and more and more, that, you know, someday I'm going to die and people who didn't really even care about me are going to fight over this stuff. You know, I think it's Robert Kiyosaki who talks about that, you know, like people fighting over the stuff after you died that, you know, you accumulated. So I always say to people, look, succeed, make money, do great things in life, build a business, go reach for the highest that you can reach. But remember that all of that is temporary. And if you construct it for the accumulation of your own goods, if you construct it for, you know, merely to have this as a possession through which you justify your existence, you'll find in the end, it doesn't work.
So true.
So if you're going to construct it, if you're going to start a business, if you're going to make money, if you're going to have fame, have it. Like I don't think there's anything wrong with that, but orient it toward the multiplication of beauty on the earth, toward the alleviation of suffering, and take that opportunity as an opportunity through which you can anchor someone else's life as well. Give them a starting place that maybe they didn't have that you had. And when we live our lives this way, this other-centered design, where we're not seeing ourselves as just accumulating, but as part of an ecosystem that we have the opportunity to nurture and flourish and you know, what's the word I'm looking for? And cultivate. Our life has meaning, man. You know, we find meaning much deeper than what we could ever find in the surface sort of platitudes that the world has to offer. And then if you take that deep, beautiful meaning and you find that its anchor is actually in the very heart of the designer, and you build those roots into that designer and you get to know him, you have this relationship with God. I think, at least for me personally speaking, the beauty of that is that in him, I know everything that I absolutely love and adore in this life. In him, it doesn't have an end. You know, I think it was Simone de Beauvoir, the existentialist, who once said that, you know, I want the context that is my life to go on without end. And she wasn't a believer, she wasn't a religious person, but she felt this drive, this something within her, you know, like it was organic to her being, to say, look at the context of my life. I want this to go on without end, you know. And I think that that's something that we have in the person of God, is when we're rooted and anchored in him, the beauty and the things that give our life meaning and purpose and significance, that amplify beauty, that amplify excitement and enthusiasm and joy, that's actually something that we can enjoy forever. But that's a different conversation, you know. So I'll probably stop myself there.
Yeah. Oh, brother, this is absolutely gold. And one thing, I've got a couple of final questions that I'm gonna put in your direction, if that's okay, because this is just absolutely gold.
Sure.
I had one of my clients send me in a question, and his question was, how do we connect with people? This particular client is very spiritual himself in his own ways. And he was saying, how do we connect with audiences and other people and talk about spirituality? Maybe they're not quite ready for the conversation of God as such, because for whatever reason, and maybe as a coach or a speaker, you're up there on stage and you want to talk to people in a way that it addresses spirituality without trying to feel like you're forcing something on them. But how do you talk about spirituality as something that is part of people and not something that's put on them, like a responsibility? I feel like you've touched on it quite a bit already, but is there anything you'd add to that?
Yeah. So I don't know if this will fully answer your question. I'll say two things. Number one, I have found that the easiest way to engage spiritual discussions with people without getting too over the top with religious categories is to be really familiar with existential thought. If you can familiarize yourself with existential thought and existential questions and you know, what's the word I'm looking for? Existential wrestlings. You can have extremely profound conversations with people that are deeply spiritual, that don't necessarily have to, you know, the person doesn't necessarily feel like, hey, I have to like have a Bible study now, right? I always say to people, even in my spiritual coaching, you know, when I coach people who want to like process spiritual wounds or whatever, I say to them, look, what we're going to do doesn't require you to join my church and become a Christian any more than yoga requires you to be a Hindu or meditation requires you to be a Buddhist, right? Yeah. You can wrestle with these ideas and these modalities without having to, you know, feel the need or the pressure like, oh, I need to convert now. It's not necessary. And there's a reason why I believe that. There's an actual logic or philosophy that I have that undergirds that. And my philosophy is this: I believe that God designed the cosmos to work a certain way. And that whether or not you believe in him, if you align with that design, you will experience transformation and healing in life. So I'll give you an example. If God designed the human body to thrive on vegetables and not sugar, you're going to be healthier eating vegetables instead of sugar, whether or not you believe in God. right? That's
True.
the design. The design is take care of your body, exercise, eat healthy. Don't overload it with the, apple crumble every day. That's my favorite. With custard, bro. The design, it's designed a certain way, like if you align with the way God designed your body to flourish, your body's going to flourish whether or not you believe in him. The vegetables are going to have the same amount of minerals and the same amount of nutrients.
True.
The rice is going to have the same satiety value, and you're going to burn the same amount of calories when you run. It's because it's designed that way. This is sort of in a physical sense. And I believe that this is true as well in an existential and a psychological sense. If we can align ourselves to the design of the cosmos, the way God designed the cosmos to function. It's the same with finances, right? There's a design to finances. If you learn the art of managing your money well, which is an art in and of itself, it's really what you're doing is you're aligning your financial habits to a broader economic world, right? If you've got that alignment, you're going to find greater financial success. It's no secret that someone who is bartering with reality, as Jordan Peterson says, right? And like saving now for the future is going to have a better future than someone who's like maxing out all their credit cards, right? Like,
true.
It's a design thing, And so this is what I often say to people is what I aim to do if I'm coaching someone or in conversation with someone who's not a believer in Jesus, like, look, I don't make any apologies or qualms about it. I'm a Jesus guy, like through and through, man. Yeah. Like I'm a Jesus freak is what they used to call him in the 90s. That's me. But if I'm talking with someone who has a different faith or maybe no faith at all, I either focus on existential, sort of like the existential questions and wrestlings, or I just try and learn, like, how do you see the cosmos? How do you understand the spirituality? And then I speak to them in their language, because fundamentally what I believe is whether or not you believe in Jesus, the universe is designed a certain way by the designer. And if I can lead you to alignment with that design, you're going to be way better off, regardless of whether you share all of my religious convictions or not. And so that's what I often aim for in terms. Now, if someone wants to know more, if someone's like, actually, look, I'm really curious. I would love to know more about Jesus, more about the Bible. Okay, we can have that discussion then. Like, I'm open to it if someone else is open to it, but I don't shove it onto people, and I have found the existential mode of thought and engagement really helps with that middle ground.
I love that, brother. That's a super solid answer. Thank you for sharing that. And on that point, like getting in line with the design, like the fundamental things that exist, such as, your body thrives off vegetables and exercise. Like we get that. On that note, I believe that living in alignment with our purpose and our values and our truth, the thing that is absolutely true on our heart, the impact we want to make, getting clear on that and allowing ourselves to do that is part of that whole setup. Like that is spiritual in and of itself, because you were created with a dream on your heart, with a vision. So I believe one of the most, and I say, I don't know what you think of this, but one of the most spiritual things we can do is actually go after our truth and what is what we would deem as our purpose. Yeah. So on that note, Marcos, do you believe everyone on earth has a purpose?
Yeah, absolutely. But I don't believe that people's purpose is prescripted.
Yep.
Right. So I don't think
it's not on them before they're born. Because I'm an existentialist. So, existence precedes essence. So, but I also don't think it's biblical to, like the idea that God has prescribed or pre-selected a person's purpose for them. I do believe that there are specific individuals who have a purpose that God has chosen before they were born. You kind of see some stories like that in scripture. Oh, I chose you while you were in your mother's womb for X, Y, Z. But I don't think that is normative of the human experience. I think there are key individuals that God had a very key specific calling for. Most of us, though, I believe that God's purpose for humanity as a whole, and I see this all the way back in Genesis, from the very act of creation itself, was that we would be cultivators of beauty.
right? That we would cultivate the beauty of the earth. A lot of people think when they hear about the creation story in the Bible that the whole planet was like this luscious garden. But when you read Genesis 1 and 2, you actually find out that the Garden of Eden in which Adam and Eve were placed was one tiny part of the planet. It was in a little region called Eden on the east, right? And there was this garden there. The rest of the planet, Genesis chapter 2 says, was uncultivated. So what was humanity supposed to do then? They look at this beautiful garden Eden, and then through having children and building communities and building societies and civilizations and tribes, they would spread out into the earth and multiply the beauty that they saw in Eden everywhere they went until the whole planet was this gorgeous garden, right? And so what you find then very early in Genesis is that the purpose, the sort of existential or purpose for humanity was to be cultivators of beauty. And so what I often challenge people is like, God may not have a very, very, very specific, I chose you before you were born for this one thing. There might be a spectrum of things that you're good at that you can tap into right now and say, I'm going to do this. I'm going to put my passion and my energy into this thing right here. And God will bless it. The only thing that I would say is whatever you do, always ask yourself, how can I do this in a way that cultivates the beauty of the earth?
Oh, I love that.
Because that's the primal, right? That's the primordial purpose. Outside of that purpose, the specifics are up to you. You co-author it with him. You co-create it with him. That's the freedom that he's given us, and the creativity and the autonomy and the agency. Find what you love and do it. Just make sure that you cultivate beauty as you do it, because you're going to find meaning in that. You're going to find satisfaction and contentment, and you're going to leave this planet so much better off than it was when you first got here. And I think that's a really cool way to live.
Yeah, that is a very cool way to live. And even Davy Goggins, the Navy SEAL, like he spoke about how one day when he meets God, he wants God to be like, wow, I made you for some great stuff, but you exceeded my expectations.
Yes.
Like, I heard that. I was like, that is good. I like that.
That is good.
That.
That is good.
Yeah, amazing. So Marcos, I know you run the Unknown God podcast with Joel Brown. I've listened to a couple of episodes of that. Absolutely phenomenal. So people can connect you with you there.
Yep.
How else can people get around what you do? You've got a book as well, don't you?
Yeah. I have a book. It's specifically for those who are looking for a healing perspective on the story of the Bible. So if you're not interested in the story of the Bible, then maybe it's not for you. But if you're like, hey, I'd love to get to know the Bible, I'd love to get to know God, know Jesus a bit more, but I want to do it in a way where the frame is actually oriented toward healing, rather than, some of these artificial constructs that we often find in religion that perpetuate injustice and suffering. So that's what that book's about. It's called The Road, A Journey Through the Narrative of Scripture. I'm actually years down the track when I publish it, because it's on the second edition now. Okay. When I released the third edition, which is probably a few years down the track, I got too many other things to do right now. I think I'll change the subtitle to A Healing Journey through the narrative of Scripture, because that's essentially what it is. Yeah. And you can find that. But basically, if you want to get a hold of me, just go to pastormarkt.com. So that's Pastor Mark, M-A-R-C, and then just the letter T.com. Books there, Instagram's there, podcast is there, everything's there. You can contact me if you want coaching sessions on there as well. Everything's there. Yeah. Amazing.
And you obviously pastor a community, a church in Perth. Is that correct?
Yeah. I'm actually church planting, which is a weird term if you're not familiar with church culture. It's basically starting a new church. Okay. In Coburn, in Perth. Yeah. And it hasn't started yet. Like I'm working with a small team of pretty awesome people to try to like construct the culture and, sort of engineer, like, what's this thing going to look like? Because we want it to be a community that's really like inclusive and relevant and engaging with our city. But I don't really have a place to send you yet that like, hey, check it out here. Because it's not, it's still under construction.
It's in the making. I like it.
It's in the making. Yeah. So just hashtag watch this space.
Yeah. Fantastic.
Something will pop up, I'm hoping, next year.
Well, I'm sure if they follow you on Instagram, they get around what you're doing. I'm sure it's going to be published all over your platforms when it happens, which is absolutely phenomenal. Yeah. Marcos, I've thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. And the question that I ask all of my guests And I'm really blessed to have had some extraordinary guests. And I'll say that, you're just adding to the incredible lineup of people I've been blessed to talk to. Yep. And really, you're a great demonstration of someone who's stepped powerfully into their purpose and who's living an extraordinary mission. And, everyone's capable of this. And that's one thing when I bring the guests on here, I want everyone to see the guests and be like, okay, if they can do it, I can do it too. Like none of us, the guests, myself included, would say that, we're unique in any way. I'm sure you would agree. Like everyone's got the greatness within them if they can see it within us.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So hopefully this message is just, this podcast is an invitation, is calling people forward to cultivate a deeper relationship with God and cultivate that spiritual aspect of their life so they can have that anchor in the storms and just be all that they're meant to be here on earth. Yeah. So Marcos, the question I'd love to just wind up on is, if you were given access to the biggest platforms out there, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and everyone was watching for 1 minute, you had everyone's attention, and you got to speak into the hearts of everyone who checks out these platforms every day, what would be your message to the world?
Oh man. I'm gonna have to go. You can start the timer in a moment.
Yeah.
I'm gonna have to lean in. I'm gonna have to go Jesus nerd.
Yeah. Man, do your thing. The timer starts now.
That's just the one thing that I would want to communicate to the world is that in Jesus we find a new way to be human, and that through him he is rebirthing a new civilization and a new humanity and a new society in which there is no injustice. There's no ecological injustice. There's no social injustice. There's no racial injustice. There's no oppression. None of the things that perpetuate suffering and heartache on the earth. No economic injustice. He is creating a whole new world where the cornerstone and drive and law and ethic and politic and whatever you want to call it boils down to one thing, and that's love. And I want to be a part of that. And I want you to be a part of it too. That's it.
Amazing, brother. Powerful 1 minute. And
I think it was like 30 seconds, but
you did really well. That was a lot of wisdom in a very short time. So thank you for that, brother. Look, I've thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. You've been very generous with your time too. So thank you for that. Everyone check out Pastor Marcos, doing amazing work online. Love the posts you put out too, brother. So thank you so much for joining us for the Thoughts on Purpose podcast today.
Thank you very much, Nash. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, brother.